Well, hello there, goblins and ghouls. So, as I'm sure you're aware, we're supposed to support this crazy system, and many of us do go along with it because the government always presents itself as being normal. In fact, it is regarded as setting societal norms. So, when George W. Bush suggested the U.S. would show humility in international affairs, we were supposed to believe him and smile about it. If it blatantly contradicts that principle in its policies, we don't even have to notice. We're just doing the best we can under the circumstances which we are said to overwhelmingly control and manipulate. Right? We've got everything under control. So, recalling the legendary Joseph Campbell, a thinker of the 20th century, best known to film students through the concept of the hero's journey, one of the defining traits of heroism is using one's power as it is bestowed to fulfill a higher purpose than one's power itself. So the hero's journey is, in a way, similar to how governments propagandize citizens into supporting militarism and nationalism generally. This is easy to accept and is the norm for plenty of people. But social norms are a wacky thing, really, if you think about them. If you burp or fart, you're supposed to say, "Excuse me." However, if your government lies us into a war and kills tens of hundreds of thousands or even millions of people, it's not supposed to apologize. And in fact, you are supposed to call all of the critics of that war anti American and terrorists and, they support Saddam Hussein or whatever. It's a whole other set of values and manners, isn't it? However, there are exceptions, and in fact, there was an interestingly uh, fascinating exception recently. When the US bombed a family instead of any actual known terrorists in the year 2021, General Frank McKenzie actually went on record and apologized for it. So I must admit, I was a bit surprised at the time because that is certainly not always the norm. It's not what I was expecting to happen. Those rare little humanizing moments are perhaps pleasant surprises in a disgusting sense, and I don't really know how to process them because there's something strange about them. On the one hand, it does suggest human emotion being displayed and all that good stuff, but there's a very simple point of fact. If an ordinary citizen, unlinked to a government, killed 10 members of a family, usually they don't just get away with a mere apology, right? Somebody will slap on some handcuffs and you're probably going to end up in a prison cell somewhere. Similarly, if I had decided to head downstate to Flint, Michigan to poison their water supply, it seems like my ass would have been thrown into the slammer, right? But I guess if you've got power, there are different standards, different dynamics in play that typically mean you can get away with these harmful acts or these harmful decisions that end up negatively impacting people or sometimes killing them. So, as much as I appreciate these faint glimmers of humanity, I know they are still fleeting and almost clumsily serve to obscure the true unthinking, unfeeling nature that is called foreign policy, or militarism, or as a general phenomenon, which transforms humans into mere collateral damage and statistics to analyze, and they become abstract considerations among all the pros and cons that come with either statecraft or other forms of planning, such as non state terrorism. Although, let's be honest, the Taliban and Al Qaeda were always basically statists, as their theocratic ideas were always at the forefront of their understanding of the world, and they wanted to rule over others. That is, again, the core, the essence of being a state or having a statist ideology. In the grand scheme of things, there are statistics, anomalies, and heroes to worship, like good old Uncle Sam and his mighty, majestic soaring eagle, who only leaves his perch or Sam's sturdy shoulder to swoop down and take down some evildoers. That's what we're supposed to believe happens, not that these families get bombed or whatever. Those are just, collateral damage. We're supposed to look the other way, and you're naive if you focus on that or whatever. We've all heard it. In much the same way, we're expected to believe that our military industrial complex, the one that brought us the war on drugs, the Patriot Act, the war in Iraq, etc., exists to serve the people, or, we the people, and protect them and us from tyranny. If it violates that principle in various ways, then it must have some legitimate reason behind it. It couldn't be that there's some sort of nefarious aspect to it, sort of built into the overarching ideology or, of course, some of the individual actors involved. Their logical standard is simply if the US does it, it's all about freedom and liberty and blah, 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 blah. In contrast, I'm of the belief that principles tend to be more valid if they have an if dot 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 them form, rather than simply assume something must inherently work in some way. I think there should be some definite criteria in order for a principle to have a meaning that can be adequately understood and defended, or at least as definite as possible. So if then means if we are to have this, then it should be done in a certain way if we want a certain result, right? For an example that I like to give, if we are to have parents or guardians over a child, then they should have some parental authority. But if they were to exercise parental authority in a just manner, it should be within certain limits. Again, that's if we want to prevent physical or mental harm to the child due to abuse or neglect. Obviously, I can't claim it's a perfect formula or standard, but I also don't think that it even needs to be. It's a general principle or rule of thumb, but it can work on a hell of a lot of issues, and I suppose it can be used in a corrupt manner as well, but often I think it can work against corruption or evil. It also seems certain interests dominating American society have their own version of this principle, and it can be perverted. If we were to have oppression, then someone should be able to make a solid career out of it, making megabucks and self aggrandizing about it like it's God's greatest gift to mankind. So it's no coincidence that there's a correlation between the size and capacity and profitability of the US military and the size and scope of the war on drugs, or the war on terror, or the war on this, or the war on that, and the overt militarization of police forces, to the extent that they're increasingly difficult to distinguish from each other, just as businesses and government can blend together and become increasingly similar, despite what some people insist is not the case. There is a merging of those elements. You can see it. Yet seldom does anyone even mention the idea that, hey, maybe no one should make even a single red cent from this kind of shit. That idea does not even enter people's heads. The truth is that to some people, war is deemed necessary to create order itself. And if that is true, then the first casualty of war is truth in the classic formulation. The rest of it can fall into place like a well ordered game of dominoes, for the most part. When the government declares a war on drugs, it justifies the idea that some people should be punished. The harsher the war, the greater the intensity and duration of the punishment. And as an added bonus feature, when these efforts are making big bucks for certain people, the profits will also intensify the further down this militarized cop to prison rabbit hole we venture down. The result is the complete dominance of the military over law, and Uncle Sam's perverted grin and gaze also intensifies. It's a dirty job, but someone's got to do it, right? Right.